Has a line of poetry ever made you weep? Now, there are two answers to this question. It's either no, and if the answer is no, it's either because you're not reading poetry, or you don't have the toolkit in order to access deep feeling in response to poetry. How you can do that is a conversation for another day. If the answer is yes, then almost certainly you don't fully know why. We can try to dissect poetry, analyze it, break it down, and try to understand what these incomprehensible feelings inside of us are, but very rarely do we get to the bottom of it. Sometimes we'll come up with a shallow answer. We'll say, oh, the melody is good here, or I like the imagery here, but it doesn't get much further than that. We don't actually go to the heart, to the core of why we might like a certain image or sound. You have your favourite poets, I have mine, Shakespeare, Keats, Blake. Most people who fall in love with poetry, there's usually an earth-shattering single line that changes everything for them. Everybody usually remembers their first line, the first line that sort of moved them. And it might take a long time, well into old age, to actually comprehend why that single line got you enamored with poetry. For me, the magical first line was from a John Donne poem. To most people, it would be innocuous. And if you've had a line that sort of ushered in your appreciation of poetry, it would also be relatively meaningless to other people. So I started thinking, why is this? And I started thinking, why do some lines that seemingly have no power, no magic to them, are seemingly just, normal words, why do they move us so? And if you'll permit me this small indulgence, this was a bit of poetry that really moved me. This is from To Autumn by John Keats, and it's the third stanza, the fourth line. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. It was that line, touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. And I started thinking, because this got me to the point where tears were welling up inside me. And I started thinking, why is this seemingly innocuous line so powerful to me? And that's where my crazy theory of poetry came from. The answer to me, the reason that great poetry moves us, is death incarnate. We humans, we have this eidetic, everlasting, generation-transcending memory printed upon our DNA when we encounter such trauma that transcends generations. I believe there is some credence to past life regressions. People always think, when people talk about past life regressions, oh, they're a bunch of kooks. Somebody, oh, you were Richard III in your past life, you sallied forth into battle with your sword held aloft. But what if that were true? I mean, there's no reason why somebody born, for example, in the Western Hemisphere, in the freezing cold, should have a phobia, a deathly phobia of things like snakes, a creature that you would never encounter in your life. Your ancestors, just a few generations back, probably went their whole lives without encountering a snake, and yet it's one of the most common phobias, even when people were not born on the plains of Africa. Somewhere along the line, the fear of that creature imprinted upon our ancestors because it kept us alive, and then it was passed down. Learned response, environment went into the genes, went into genealogy. So I started thinking about this, and I started thinking, well, perhaps when a line of poetry apprehends us, arrests us, seizes us, takes hold of our heart, our mind, our soul, perhaps this is a glimpse, an inward flash of death or past life regression. Past life regressions, one's entire life or previous life flashing before one's eyes. These states are barred to us, except for very sparse, far and few between glimpses, snatches of time that we encounter either through déjà vu, a near-death experience, or deep meditation. And I believe you can throw in, along with déjà vu, near-death experiences, deep meditation, you can throw in snatches of poetry that moves us. When a line apprehends us, poetically, aesthetically speaking, what we're actually doing is encountering a former life, something we have already experienced. This is not the kookiest theory in the world. I mean, people put together loads of kooky theories about poetry. Like, there's the Shelleyan idea of what there being an everlasting poem, one huge poem that every poet contributes to. So every minor poem is really just a small part of the fabric, of the tapestry, of a much larger poem. That's pretty cool. But this isn't too out there as a theory, because if you think about it, there's parts of the brain, we know this, that don't light up for your entire life. We can see MRI scans, we can see the part of the brain that basically has no electrical impulses, no activity, except at the precise moment right before death. The scary, terrifying moment right before you depart, or at least your body gives in. These MRI scans show that that part of the brain that has lain dormant for your entire life lights up like a Christmas tree before death. This is when you see people from your past lives, people who have already died. This is when you see grandparents, parents, loved ones, people taken before their time beckon you forward into the light. People talk about a hot white light. They talk about seeing their grandmother. And though this moment before death can be terrifying, it's actually ultimately really comforting if you get right before death. This part of the brain, the moment before death, releases overwhelming waves of DMT to keep you comfortable, to make you feel safe. You feel warm and protected. You feel surrounded by family. So in your last dying moments, even if there's nobody with you, you could still feasibly die with a smile on your face because you feel like you're going into a better place, with company, with people that love you. There is an imperceptible nanosecond, which to all outward appearances might look like intense suffering, fear and pain, but that nanosecond for the person experiencing their last moments before death stretches on for near infinity, and it's that point where they feel completely safe, completely at home and totally loved. And I believe this is proof of God. There is no evolutionary reason to design a part of the brain that will give you comfort in your moments before death, because there's no incentive, there's no passing on the genes, there's no procreation impulse. This is, you're going to die and you're no longer going to pass on your genes. This is not keeping you alive. This, I believe, is not only proof of God, this is proof of a divine maker, perhaps even a benign maker, a creator who loves us. It's like when you look at a timepiece, like some of the best timepieces in the world. I got really into horology. Some of the best timepieces in the world, as a little signature, the watchmaker will craft a beautiful mechanism that ticks and its movements are glorious and beautiful, and it has no bearing on the smooth running and functioning of the timepiece itself. It's purely there to be mechanical and work and be an artifice and be a beautiful creation, but it's ultimately useless. And perhaps that part of the brain is like that if we compare ourselves to a ticking watch. And I think that's what these lines of poetry allow us to apprehend, this time before death. Or perhaps if we don't even go back before death, perhaps if we're just going back to the years that we cannot consciously comprehend, back to the baby years, back to the time before autonomous thought, autonomous decision, back to the time that feels like a fever dream, reality and memory and dream all intermixed. You don't know what's real and what's not. Perhaps back to that time of your life that are just on the fringes of your consciousness that you'll never fully access, but they have imprinted themselves somewhere upon you. And that's what we glimpse in great lines of poetry. Doesn't matter if this theory is true, the answer is no. This theory does not need proving, and were somebody to prove it incorrect or false, it wouldn't matter anyway. It would have no bearing on its utility. This theory is crazy to those who are not open-minded, but if you're even slightly open-minded, this theory doesn't sound all that crazy. Poetry is not a science, it's definitely not an exact science, and some of our theories, our touchstones of philosophical thought, they are just there to open our mind up a little bit further, to usher in some new appreciation, some new way, a new prism through which to view great poetry. You might completely disregard this theory and say it's crazy, say it's not true, but now that you know it, you might approach poetry a little bit differently and hopefully get some new, renewed relish and appreciation out of great works. If this theory opens us up to appreciate poetry in a new light, with a heart revived, with fresh eyes, I believe that's good enough, because in there, somewhere, we might find our truth. Let me know, what do you think of this theory? And if you're really up for it, let me know your crazy theory of poetry. Why do we love great poetry? Why does great poetry move us? What do you think? Thanks for watching.